Hello and welcome to another episode of the Super Learning Professionals interview series. Today is very special because I'm joined by Andrew Berry. Andrew is the founder of Curious Lion Learning, but he was also the program director of the On Deck Course Creator Fellowship, which I've joined and have learned a tremendous amount from about online creation, about doing these kind of podcasts. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Dom. It's so cool to be here. Love what you're doing.
So first of all, Andrew, what you've set up with Curious Lion is helping companies and creators teach in an effective and engaging way. So can you tell a bit more about how you got interested in that and how you got the idea of building this company?
Yeah. So I've sort of been in the world of adult education for about 15 years, and I'm a chartered accountant by background. So I studied that as a profession, and I was always kind of good at maths and accounting and sort of logic. And so followed that field, thought I'd get into accounting. But as soon as I got into it, I realized I actually didn't enjoy doing the work. What I really enjoyed doing, and which was great, was that professional accounting, like most big consulting companies, have sort of training is a big part of it, right? You learn from those just above you, and you do a lot of these training courses. And I just fell in love with it right away. And as soon as I went through those week-long trainings, I just wanted to be the people, the facilitators in the front of the room. And so I set about doing that. So I made friends with them. I asked like how to do this. And I started doing that back in South Africa. And so I just fell in love with the idea of helping people, teaching people, trying to explain concepts in a simple way, using a lot of analogies and examples. And I got really good at that with auditing, which was the profession that I was in. And so I just kind of started from there. And then I came over to the States and I had a secondment to do the development of the training that I was delivering back in South Africa. So there I started to learn about learning outcomes and learning design and all of that kind of stuff. And so really got into like the geeky side of it. It's all totally self-taught. I never studied anything on this, but I would read big books on multimedia learning design and just like all these research papers and stuff. And I just really, like we talked about this a lot, like you've got to have a passion for something, and this was my passion. I didn't see that as work. I was just like plowing through these things and just picking up little nuggets here and there, trying them in the work I was doing. And I did that for quite a while. Joined a startup that was in the hospitality industry, creating training for hotels. Did that for a year and a half, and then started Curious Lion right after that. And so I've been working with clients doing sort of custom training work ever since.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess there must have been a lot of learning involved also in going from corporate to starting your own business. So I'm very curious how you went about that, and did you apply any of the principles that you learned previously in starting your business and getting it up?
Sorry, what do you mean?
So in learning how to start and run your own business and the Curious Lion, were you able to apply some of the learning principles?
Yeah, totally. We talked about being meta quite a bit, but yeah, it's a lot of that meta process comes through. So like my personal journey of starting a company and the last 5 years of building it has been very much trial and error. I look back 5-6 years ago and I didn't know what I was doing. It's almost embarrassing to look at that. So there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of mistakes, a lot of spinning my wheels on stuff, going down the wrong path for a couple months, and then realizing, oh, that was all wasted. I need to focus on here. And so so trial and error was something that I think it's kind of like experiential learning. And I think we do a lot of this now with the work we create for clients, in that you have to like do the work. I've talked about this as well. CC learning is hard. Like you have to do the work, make the mistakes so that you can learn from them. And that was definitely a huge part of my own process for learning.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. And so what are some of the basic like 80-20 principles when you go to work with a company and they want to deliver some training? What do you tell them?
So yeah, straight up, you have to know who your audience is and most specifically what their prior level of knowledge is. So we do a lot of onboarding or like cohort based stuff. So it's onboarding for new hires or new managers, so it's people like in a transition. And it's very important to know, like, what do they know now? What sort of training is available to them now? What are they coming in with? So that's the first part. And then you've got to be very clear on the transformation. And so you guys have heard me talk about this in ODCC, but we talk about this with clients all the time. So what is the transformation for your managers? Like, what do you want them to be able to do once they've gone through this program? And so we get very clear, very specific on what that looks like. And we then map out that journey. And so like something might look like, let's see, a recent one was like for like a manager training, they want them to be effective leaders of their teams and to inspire growth within the people, their direct reports in their teams. And so like we identify performance management, coaching, and feedback, for example, ability to give feedback as 3 core skills in that. And so we know where they're coming in. Sometimes some of them haven't managed someone before. We know where they want to be at the end of this program. And then we map out those skills that they need and the milestones they need to hit to get there. So that's sort of, I'd say, is the 80-20 to answer your question of, who are these people, where they're starting, where do you want them to end, and then reverse engineer the steps that you need to get them there.
Right. So now recently with On Deck, but also before, you've focused a lot on online creators, online teaching. So how are you able to map the learnings from company training to the learning principles that you can use when teaching online? And what did that learning process for yourself also look like?
So, I mean, that was, when COVID hit, that was a huge, there was a temporary kind of pause and freeze in my business, and a lot of clients were not just, no one wanted to spend money. But then soon after that, there was a big emphasis of, we've got these day-long workshops, or these, some companies send their people somewhere for a week, some training center or hotels in Las Vegas. And we got all these trainings, we get them all in a room, we do these things with them, and how are we going to do that now online? And so that was when business picked up quite a bit because of people trying to figure that out. What does virtual training look like? And I think the mistake we've seen play out in the past with like MOOCs, that's a good example in the very early days, was let's just take the lecture, let's just put a camera on that and then film it, and then someone's going to watch that video. And then we'll design some elements around that where people can discuss it, and maybe some activities and exercises. And like, we all know that doesn't work, right? No one's going to sit through a 60-minute lecture that's just put on video. No one, So we have to get pretty creative with how we deliver it. And the best way I've found to do that is to break out, talk about the why, the what, the how, and the actions that you want people to take. So why are we learning this? Why is this important? How's it going to benefit you as the learner? The what is all the concepts and the frameworks and the definitions that they need to know to be able to do it. The how is how to do it. And that's where a lot of examples and analogies and all that come through. And then the action is, what should you do next now that you've learned this piece? And so what I found is what works really well is we take the why and the what, and you preload, you pre-train that. So you front load it with asynchronous training through videos, audio, podcasts, resources, books, blog posts, all that sort of thing. And so people go through that, and then you create a sort of a deliberate, the action step in that thing is a deliberate reflection, right? An opportunity for reflection. So what did you learn from watching this video? How are you going to apply this essay, the blog post, whatever? And so with our clients, we create these physical workbooks, which they then ship to their employees, and they would write this down. So they spend the first half of the week watching these videos, learning the whys and the whats, and then reflecting. And then we would use the precious Zoom time, which, as we know, everyone was just completely wiped out by the end of just Zoom fatigue. So we would try and limit the amount of time that they spent on Zoom. And we would focus on the how. So then much more facilitation. There's no lecture needed because that's all been pre-trained. And it's really like, okay, so you guys learned about this concept of the growth mindset. You watched this TED talk by Carol Dweck. So how are we going to apply that to our situation here, right? How would you apply that in a team meeting, for example, with a direct report? And so so it's a much more like it involves the learner a lot more. It's a lot more generative learning. And then some practice with breakout rooms, that kind of thing. And then at the end, like basically the action that they're going to take is getting them to commit to it. So all the learners sort of leave going, I'm going to set up this meeting with this direct report, and I'm going to practice this framework for giving feedback, for example. And then we would have one more Zoom meeting, which would probably be a week later, to then debrief that. And so they would all come back. And that one's like super, like there's hardly any facilitation. It's all driven by the learners saying, okay, I did this thing. This really worked well. I kind of, found this part pretty tricky. and they just start talking to each other. And as you know from ADCC, the peer-to-peer learning is huge. We learn so much from each other, because I can see, okay, yeah, Dom, you did this, you had this conversation, and the way you're explaining it there, like the challenge you faced was exactly what I felt like. And it maybe helps me see it in a different lens. Or so those sort of second Zoom meetings, the debrief ones, were incredible. And so the feedback we got from this was just people never had that opportunity to get together and to really discuss their learning. It's like this deliberate practice, right? Like they took the action and they talked about what they learned. And no one often know, especially in companies that are moving at such a quick speed, they don't go through the rigor of thinking like that. And so just breaking it out was a huge revelation for people. And it didn't feel like Zoom.
Well, we were able to basically break out, talk one-on-one about our experiences, about how we tried what was taught in the course, right? And by trial and error we learned, but then also we can learn from other people's mistakes by matching up their experience to our own, and kind of spotting patterns, I think, which you're also kind of getting into. Now it's okay to talk a bit more about peer-to-peer learning and spotting patterns that we can learn from.
Yeah. So the peer-to-peer piece, it increases your surface area for coming into contact with patterns that you can recognize, right? I think that's a key component of that. So you're just going through so many more of these breakouts, you're bound to find someone where you're like, that sounds similar to my situation, and then you can really dig in and dive deeper with that person and learn from each other. And then the pattern recognition piece of it comes in, I think, where, I talked about deliberate practice, and a big part of that, as I know you've thought a lot about, is mental representations. So the more you do something, and especially when you do it in a deliberate way, you're creating mental representations that could be, depending on, it varies by person, but it could be like visuals, right, that you use to like construct this knowledge tree for a particular topic or domain or whatever. So I think that's another big part of it, that you're slowly creating these mental representations over time. And I think the cool thing I like about pattern recognition is you need time. So as you keep doing this and you do it over a long period of time, you get the benefit of pattern recognition. And it's why, for example, I've been doing this for 15 years. I can look at a course or talk to a course creator and pretty quickly diagnose where they're stuck, and can give them 2 or 3 things that I've seen work in those situations, right? And it's not prescriptive. It's not saying, oh, this is what's wrong and this is what you need to do, and you can, but it's like, this looks like this thing, and in these 3 cases, this is what the person did, or this is something you could try, and that's it, right? So it's more like, it's the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage, as our friend Cam has said. And I think that's just the most powerful thing you can do as a teacher, and as someone that's done the deliberate practice, that's built the experience, has built mental representations. How you teach that to people is to show them, and you've got the superpower to be able to do it very quickly, to show them all the different possibilities that are open to them,
really like
given that particular block.
What Ray Dalio also calls, it's just another one of those, right, if you have that experience. And I also loved what you said about building those mental representation knowledge tree, and to combine that with deliberate practice. Do you see any shortcuts to build those representations, or do you actually have to put in the reps and build that through practice? Can you be deliberate about building those representations, or can you only be deliberate about the practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. My gut saying is you can only be deliberate about the practice. The mental, but it's sort of, mental. So I don't think I'm ever, I'll just speak from my experience, I'm not explicit in building up mental representations. As I'm saying this, I'm also thinking about memory palaces, which I know is something you've talked a lot about, and I'm interested to see how this fits in, because there you are being quite explicit and deliberate, right? You're like, okay, using this image in this room, and it's going to denote this concept. But I think like true mental representations, like what Anders Ericsson talks about in Peak, is something that just is the byproduct of time and deliberate practice. And so the deliberate practice piece is intentional. And you see that in so many different fields. It's practicing the thing golf swing, playing the piano, I don't know, doing an accounting, like balancing a balance sheet or whatever, and then sort of the deliberate part comes in. And so a lot of people I interview in my podcast do this, and this is the hard part, because the deliberate thing is like watching the game tape afterwards, analyzing what you did, where you went wrong, and then really focusing in on like, oh, okay, this is the part I got wrong. This is part of my swing I need to practice. So then going back and doing the whole thing again and focusing on that one part. And then doing that over and over until that part's good. And then you see, because it's a lot of moving parts, and now we focus on another part. That's deliberate practice, and that just takes time, like lots of iterations of it, focusing on different parts and refining and tweaking them.
Yeah, I like that.
And,
it's like,
and that's the hard stuff.
You have to put in the practice, but you can be deliberate about seeking out those little problems that you then need to basically make smaller circles around. I think Josh Waitzkin calls it as in the art of learning, and basically really zoom in on that.
Yeah, that's a great
I love that
visual representation for it.
And to go maybe a bit more meta in a different direction, so you were talking about all those books, etc., that you read about learning and teaching effectively in the digital world, etc. And what was your learning system for learning about that and basically becoming an expert in that area?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I haven't actually been asked that in a long time. It's evolved, I'll say that. So it's definitely evolved. I think now my process is very much, I use Roam quite a bit. So I consume a lot of information from a lot of different sources, and then try and highlight that and get that into Roam. And then through a process of iterating, take out, summarize and condense, and then move things around until it sort of reveals some kind of new pattern or concept or idea, that feels unique. So I mean, I think the initial step was my early way of doing this was similar, but it was much more manual. So what I would do, I remember I have this book sitting here actually, where I wonder if this is the actual book. So this is actually hilarious. I didn't plan this at all, but so this is the book. This is Richard Mayer's 12 Principles of Multimedia Learning. And so I would just write these like really detailed handwritten notes from reading the book. I don't know if you can see much on that. And this is all the stuff I still write about. Like, this is the first multimedia principle of visuals and words better than either one of those by themselves. And it's all very theoretical. It's quite dense academic stuff. But that's kind of the point, right? I think I don't go back to this anymore, but the process of doing this really embedded these ideas in my head. And now this multimedia principle, contiguity principle, I just know it when I see it. I don't need to like refer back to, like, he's got evidence here, 5 different studies, that type of stuff. And this is the kind of thing you don't teach people, that no one needs to know this level of detail. Right. This helped embed the idea in my mind, so that I knew it when I saw it, and I could probably explain it through a lot of examples. So that's interesting.
That's really cool.
Kind of how it
like
was in the early
How
days.
did you learn that of Andrew Barry of ODCC? Yeah, I love that. So another thing you mentioned is like,
exactly.
That's all kind of abstract in a way, and then the real challenge also for us in ODCC was, how do we take the stuff that we learned in your Zoom calls and map that to the actually messy online world out there, and actually put it into practice. So do you have any tips for taking something and putting that into practice?
Yeah, I mean that is you're right, the 100% the hard part, and I don't always do a great job of this. I think it's something that you just have to keep working at. Like with that type of stuff, I would apply it. Like I remember first starting the 12 principles there. I think my first thing was I did a whole Curious Lion learning methodology, incorporated a bunch of stuff, and wrote up a whole long thing on it. I think I even posted it on my website at one point. It was just like very dense and academic, and it wasn't a good way to communicate that to anyone. once I started using examples, I remember a couple of years ago, I would explainer videos. I used a few of them in ODCC. Like, there's Virgin Atlantic has an incredible in-flight video, or like the safety video at the beginning of their flights. And it's just, if you go through that, like I've got this guide on my website, 5 steps to digital training, and I sort of break down the video, and I highlight those principles as they appear in the video. And it's actually amazing. Like, once you see that and then point it out in video or like in something like that, and people can watch it and go, oh, that's what that's called. It just makes it so much clearer, right? And so that was when it really started, I think, resonating with people. They're like, oh, there's actually a word for that. There's a reason that those things are happening, and it's tied and it's making me learn it better. So yeah, so I think, to answer your question, it's examples as much as possible. Like, that's the best way to learn things, especially these sort of very theoretical academic things. Just tons and tons of examples, and that's the hard part. I remember in prepping for all the 16 sessions I did, my favorite sessions were the ones that I had like really good examples and I was excited about them, and I felt like those really hit the mark. And there were probably 2 or 3 of those 16 sessions that I really didn't enjoy. And it was because I was really scraping for examples, and I think I probably erred on the side of too much instruction. So yeah, I think that's the key. Examples from other walks, other parts of life, and use that to then illustrate the points that
I was just thinking about
making.
Robbie Crabtree as well, because he did this great talk in ODCC as well about storytelling, and that's something Ryan and I also kind of arrived at. Like, the best way to teach something is by telling a story and then interspersing that with the principles as they appear in the story. Basically, what you just mentioned as well. So I really like that. And yeah.
But so I'd love to know your thoughts, because that's really hard to do. I remember there were some sessions that I was sitting down to prep. I was just like, you can't force a story, right? Like, that was the hard part. I don't know if you have any tips on that from what you guys have been working on, but I found there were 1 or 2 where I just couldn't get a story, and you can't force it either. And those are the most challenging ones to design.
I've been working on recently is I read this book about negotiation. Actually, it's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And yeah, it's amazing. And he has every chapter it starts with a story, and then after the story, he will basically explain all of the principles that he used in his story, and it's really well done. And I actually discovered that if I want to learn this, what I have to do is not take like the bullet point summaries at the end of the chapter, but I actually have to take this story from the beginning and then insert those principles as they appear in his stories. And because his stories are so well written, it's actually possible to do that and even make the principles into flashcards or something like that.
Cool. That's so good. Funny enough, in this book of mine, all my notes will never split the difference. Yeah, that's so funny, man.
Yeah, I love it. So I kind of want to see if that's translatable to other fields as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things to do, is to come up with, take a story from a totally different realm and relate it to something. And that's actually what I try to do now in Rome as well. Like, so once you got like the principle condensed into a form, actually, this goes back to what I was saying about forcing it as well. It's like, you just got to let it sort of marinate and let it sit there, and like over time you might find a story and it's like, oh, that actually makes me think of this. You sort of you make that match, and that's sort of where the magic happens.
One thing that would be interesting, have you found that Rome can actually make you help those connections? Because what I often find is that I can't force that with a tool. I just have to let my unconscious work, and maybe like 2 days later or a week later it will hit me or something, and I haven't found that I can actually speed it up with tools. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I totally agree. It doesn't accelerate that process for me either. I think it makes it easier once, like you said, and suddenly like something clicks and you're like, oh, I need to, and then I find Rome's easy to quickly find that thing and to then make the connection myself, but it doesn't accelerate the process for me yet. I'd love to know if others,
I think it's, it definitely facilitates the process of writing, but I think it's one bridge too far to call like a tool for thought, because I haven't found that yet. So another thing is, like, you've been very inspiring to all of us in ODCC, so maybe Do you have some tips on how we can inspire others about lifelong learning, about having a growth mindset, of the great things you talked about, right?
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I mean, in this kind of line of work, and I'm sure you can relate, and a lot of people listening can relate, that's the best thing to hear, that others were inspired by what you do. I mean, it's a hard question to answer. I would say, I think that the biggest feedback I got, and that really resonated with me, was that there were two words that came up a lot, was that you're really passionate about this, and you bring a lot of joy to teaching. And those two types of feedback, and there were a few people who said that sort of on those similar lines, that really meant the most to me. I was like, I love this. I absolutely love this stuff. And I can talk about this for the rest of my life. And that's, I think, the key to inspiring other people, right? If you are like truly passionate about something and you bring genuine joy to it, it's addictive, it's infectious. And I think that rubs off on other people. And you can't fake it either, right? You really have to feel that. So yeah, I think that might be the way to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Connecting with that thing that you
that.
find the most joy and passion in.
So yeah, basically in this whole long journey that we talked about, what has been your biggest learning challenge and how did you overcome that?
Yeah,
the whole career.
So I'd say a few. One is taking agency or ownership for your own decisions, your own time, your own actions. That was something I always wanted to do. It definitely was something that was in me, but it was a lot harder to do than I realized it would be. And it's sort of like the obvious things of like, just where do you spend your time? How do you prioritize things? Saying no to things, that kind of stuff. And then that's sort of the beginning part. But then as you sort of figuring out like where should you commit to? Like once you start, because once you've gotten over that thing and you start to take control over your own decisions, your own actions, you're building something, you start to you have a lot of opportunities, a lot of ways you can go, and then deciding like the right one, if it feels right, it's intimidating because you don't want to make a mistake and waste time and money and whatnot going down the wrong path. So that was definitely something, and I don't even know if there's a right answer. I mean, I would trust my instinct a lot more. I think the times I've made decisions with mistakes were the times I second guessed my decisions or my instinct. That would be the big one. The other one, I think, is realizing that the market tells you, your audience tells you what they want, and not the other way around. I think I definitely came into this thinking like, well, this is what people want, this is what people need, and this is what I'm going to create. And this was true for my business, Curious Lion, and that has evolved into something completely different from what I initially thought it would be. And it took me a while to learn that. And I think I even saw that in ODCC, when just being more open to it. There was no way I could have prepped that whole 8 weeks out ahead of time and then just shown up every day and done the 16 presentations that I'd pre. They had to be done in the moment, based on people's responses, based on people's requests, needs, questions, that kind of thing. So it's a much more collaborative process, this idea of creating a product, creating a course, anything like that, even a service. It's collaborative, and you've got to listen to the person buying
Definitely.
you.
And I think
to
a lot of people,
really understand
me
what they
included,
need.
saw that as well. Like we came in with one idea for a course, but then as we tested it out with just ODCC people and got feedback, we basically got into completely different directions and ended up in a completely different place.
That was one of my favorite parts of it, to see people's courses just develop and go. Just people coming in thinking they were going to create a platform for a course and then ended up creating courses
definitely.
themselves. I mean, just things like that. It was amazing.
Yeah, looking forward, obviously, with the creator community and all of the opportunities for online teaching, what do you see happening in the future, and as your role in that?
I think the grand goal, the North Star of all of this, is something that we may not ever achieve, but it's the thing that will sort of light the path to keep doing this is the idea of a fully democratized access to education. And education from practitioners, from people actually doing the thing. So it's practical. It's something that can be applied right away in someone's life or business. You just look at the people that went through ODCC, and like I signed up for Jonathan Chen's cooking class, and I got this box arrived in the mail, and it had like a couple of tools and things to help you prep your kitchen, and you don't get that from masterclass. Gordon Ramsay is not sending you like a little cooking kit, right? And so that's not to say what Gordon Ramsay's teaching is not necessarily practical. It's just that it's practical, but it's also that personal touch where Jonathan can touch a certain amount of people's lives and like maybe improve their health and their cooking and all these kind of great things. And so many other people can do that. And so if more and more teachers are doing that, and I call them superstar teachers, but that really kind of learn and harness the power of the internet to reach people across the globe, the second and third order consequences of that are just staggering in terms of all the people that will benefit from that teaching. And if we can find a way to, and we're working on this with the Course Creators Collective, we can find a way to upskill and teach teachers in other parts of the world so that they can then, purchasing power parity is a thing, right? So we've got to make it accessible for people who have the skills and knowledge to be able to do this, to be able to learn how to do it, and then so that they can serve their market, so that people in their market can get access to high quality education from practitioners that can transform their lives. To me, that's the ultimate goal.
And I think
that's
with
the
internet, you have so much more scalability that can actually bring us much closer than we've been able to achieve in the past 50, 100 years. All right, so thanks a lot, Andrew, for the interview. It's been really great. So one thing I always ask is, who would you like to see next on this series? Oh, right. I love that.
I mean, we talked about him earlier. I've got to say Robbie Crabtree. I think the thing with Robbie, he surprised me when I first met him, how deeply he thought about learning. He comes from a trial lawyer background and, talks about speaking. But when I started talking to him, I was like, oh, this guy's actually into the geeky learning side of things. And he thought so hard about his course, his first iteration of performative speaking, and everyone since then.
I love that.
I think
Robbie is one of those persons, I think, who makes it look very easy, but that kind of masks the fact that he makes it look that easy because he thought so deeply about it. I love that. Yeah. So thanks again, Andrew. And if people want to find out more about you, about what you are building, what's the best way for them to do that and to get in touch?
Yeah, so to get in touch, definitely on Twitter at Bazaruto. And if you want to check out the stuff I'm doing for company-related things, go to CuriousLionLearning.com. And if you're a course creator and you want to learn how to create, check out CourseCreatorsCollective.com. It's a new project that I'm building with.
Awesome.
I'm very excited for that.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Dom. Thanks so much for having me.